nice to see so many people here, and we're very particularly welcome to the visitors, which is nice, and hope you'll join us for other meetings in the future. As you know, we normally meet in the village hall, and I don't know how many of you have already visited the Heritage Centre. It's open Thursday afternoon, Saturday morning, and occasionally on Sunday afternoon when the windmill is open, which is the second Sunday of the month during the summer. So you could combine the two if you are coming from afar or not. And the Heritage Centre, we are manning it by 2 people every time, and we would like some more help doing that. You don't have to be an expert in anything particular. Always somebody comes and sees that it's open and the computers can be put on or not, depending whether anybody wants to use them for anything. And we can help, we hope, with family history and local history. I would like to thank Father Stephen for allowing us to meet here, because it's obviously appropriate when Adrian is talking about the history of the church. And it's nice to see, I think, people who've come who don't normally come to our meetings but are perhaps involved in the church. And I'm sure most of you know Adrian, either through him having been in the village or Billericay for a long time, and he is a church warden here, so he's very well placed to talk about the history. So please welcome Adrian.
Well, I'm going to begin with a confession. I can't think of a better place to be in to make a confession. I have to say I'm somewhat daunted by this task. I'm aware there are several people out there whose families stretch back a long, long way in this village. Some of them will be outside there even now. They might have been married here or baptised here. And here's me, a mere upstart of only 30 years living in the village, though I do claim to have known it for very much longer, because my papa used to work in Stock occasionally and would bring me up, so I do have some sort of contact with it since about 1950. So there's my confession. Welcome to All Saints Stock Harvard. That is how we're still ecclesiastically known. Stock, a place within another place, or a place surrounded by a place enclosed by somewhere else. Harvard, Hereward, a steward. And indeed, until fairly recently, Stock was very much enclosed by Bucksbury. In fact, the barrier, the boundary between Stock and Bucksbury to the north end of the village went straight through the Cock, that I believe is now called something else, but I shall always call it the Cock. So if you lived to the north of the Cock, you lived in Bucksbury. If you lived to the south, you lived in Stock. And indeed there are photographs in various places by Mr. Spalding that do call the area opposite the Hoop and that area Bucksbury High Street. I believe it was, I got noted here, it was 1948 that the boundaries were finally sorted out and what we now call Stock High Street became Stock High Street. And therefore the church served all that area as well. Collins' Guide to English Parish Churches. I've got a second edition. It was published a year after the first edition, edited by good old John Betchenham, and the Essex section was selected by Lawrence King, and we'll hear a little about him later on. Stock, All Saints, Pleasant Village, typical Essex belfry, much modern restoration. Well, it's accurate enough, but it's not very informative, that really, is it? I mean, you know, 3 short bursts of information. So perhaps I'll just get a little more involved than that about it. The first written evidence of a church here is 1232. Now I think it's reasonable to assume that there was perhaps a small Norman church here, and the thickness of the south wall over there is very much a Norman sort of thickness of wall there. It's 3 foot deep. And during the restoration work of 1948, of which we'll hear on and off, there was early foundations, Anglo-Saxon stones, so possibly there was even a Saxon site here of some sort of church. So we might be able to scratch back even further than 1232. You entered through a 15th century porch. You might not have noticed on this occasion, though you might, and some of you will know it well, a small plaque that lurks behind the grill that's there to keep animals and birds out. It tells us in 1937, as a thank offering, Mr. Ellis restored the porch. I've never found out if he restored the porch before or after his wife died in 1937. Perhaps she got better, perhaps he was so grateful that she died that he restored it. Nonetheless, 1937, Mr. Ellis restored our porch, a very generous act, and the family, as we will find out, have been very generous to this church since that day. But for Mr. Ellis to do it was somewhat strange when you consider he lived in Butsbury. But I suppose it was the nearest church to him. On the other side of the door, the left-hand side, there's a holy water stool, very badly vandalised in the Commonwealth period. Very sad time for church architecture, the Commonwealth. They were Puritans, they painted a lot, but they didn't paint a lot of colour. They painted a lot of white everywhere. Many churches would have been heavily decorated, and you can still see it in Copthorne, for example, just north of the A12. There's certainly some in Belcham Walter, which is out in the country up North County. There's a little bit, although I think it's more recent, in Great Bursted. But many churches would have had a lot of paintings. Why? People couldn't read, so you gave them pictures to look at. Pictures of saints, pictures in Belcham Walter of Our Lady, pictures of anything biblical. Some of them are, show Hades and people disappearing into Hades, but the Commonwealth painted over them. We don't know what stock was like in those days, the interior of the church. It might have been painted, and indeed during the 1980 restorations, when everything was scrubbed and everything was scrubbed down, colour appeared just to my right here, round that door. That was presumably some old medieval painting. So that was exciting, but we did cover it up again. For practicality, there wasn't much of it, for one thing. For another thing, as I say, it's practical. The font as you come in, it's dated about 1430. On the top, you will see there's some lumps of lead set in at various places. These would probably have been to lock away the holy water. You would have had a large cover on it, and then you would have clamps across it in some way, and you can lock away the holy water from people stealing it. You could keep the church open. We don't now, sadly, but that's another story. There was a landmine outside, or a bomb. Depends who you read, pays you money and takes a choice. But it certainly blew all the glass off there. All the roof here went. So all the glass there is quite modern. It's by Bell, Farah Bell. The lower portions show modern activities in the church, and the upper portions show the biblical representations of them. Obviously the baptism of our Lord And then the Last Supper with below them people coming into church in their wonderful 1950 styles with a longer skirt than most people wear now, great big overcoat, and the ladies have got hats on. And then we get to the window here where they're serving at what by 1956 or 7 had become Mass in this church. That was, again, it came just after the war. The clergyman, some of you I think will agree that knew him, saying, looks remarkably like Christopher Tatham, who was the parish priest of the day. Whether it really is or it's just a sort of stock, stained glass, and by stock I mean in stock, stained glass window clergyman, I don't know. But he did look a little like that, ascetic and hairs swept well back, as you will remember, those of you that knew him. There are 2 plaques on that wall. The first to Admiral Haggard and Lady Haggard, and they were both great benefactors of the church as well. Notice Lady Haggard was Mr. Ellis's, our Adam Ellis's daughter. So again, the Ellis family were very generous to the church. And Lady Haggard was Harry Enfield's grandmother-in-law. And indeed, one of their daughters we only buried 12 months ago, Betty Gibbon, 100 years old. So she was very much a link with the past of the village and the church. This plaque, the second one, records the completion of the post-war restoration. Notice £19,000 was raised and spent. I've never done the sums, but that is in the equivalent of, well, a couple of million now at least, I should have thought, if not more, which was a lot of money to raise from around. No doubt grants were possibly there, war damage grants and things must have come in, but it must have been very hard work for Christopher Tatham when he got here. 39 priests had looked at the living in 1945. The 40th, Christopher Tatham, took it. He was 57. The church was in disarray, though usable just. His home, which was the old rectory, had been bombed and was in disarray. And there he was at 57. He had never been a parish priest before. He'd been a curate, but he didn't really know much about running a parish. And he took the living. And he said to me on one occasion, he had never worked out whether it was faith or folly that brought him to stop. But thank God he came. Having said that, we mustn't forget the work that his predecessor must have put in to get the place up and running within a few months of the bomb landing. Austin used to boast not one Sunday service was missed during the shut church time. Some were held in the old rectory. Then Lord Perry, down at Lilystone Hall, agreed that the parish could use his chapel that was on the road side of the house. And you can still see there's a sort of curve that looks like the end of a chapel at Lilystone Hall, although it's now in flats. And then he came back here after 9 months only, having got the place workable, not perfect, but workable. And that during a war, when you couldn't get any men's labour, they were all doing something else. You know, there wasn't a great deal of money around, so quite how he did it, I do not know. If we come down a bit further, we see the Tweedy brass. Now, Richard Tweedy, founder of the almshouses over the road. He died on the 28th of January 1574. Now that was repositioned in about 1841 when the chancel was extended. They were doing work here in the middle of the nave and came across a coffin in which one could clearly see some decaying bones. So quick as a flash, without asking the archdeacon or anybody else, they just covered it up and got on with the work. So we presume Richard Tweedy still lies there, although his actual brass is up on the wall. If you look at it closely, you'll see it's got crosses carved into it, and we believe it was an altar top, therefore. It's black marble, and we don't know a great deal about him. His brass says, "He hath served well against English foes in foreign lands and eke at home. In 50 years his course he ran, and died on ye 28th of January, 1574. Now, had I done a bit more research, I might speculate as to whom the prince he served at court was. Perhaps somebody will come up with the answer for me afterwards. The statue, again part of the post-war restoration, 1957, and came from Austria and was given by the Mothers' Union. The chancel, I already mentioned, was built on at a later date, 1848, basically, the chancel, but it's probably on older foundations. And the sedilia, which is the priest's seat up in the sanctuary, stone, uncomfortable. Make sure that if somebody else is preaching, other clergy can't fall asleep. Because they're out of sight up there, believe you me, except if you're sitting right there. Now they're much older. They're medieval again, and they're set into the 19th century walls. So whether there was a chancel that had decayed and broken or what, we know not. But we can speculate on that one. Then there's the east window, Christ in Glory. This is Reginald Bell, 1948. And over there, another Farabelle window with one of two horses that are in our stained glass in this church. The other one's behind me, I will get to that. And it was a bell, almost trademark. Farah and Reginald were related. A trademark was a haloed dove. There's one above our Lord over there, and you can see one in the east window. And that, I'm told, was a sort of bell trademark, as well as the one that you can't see probably, which is a little bell. And the date as well is incorporated into one of the lower lights right at the bottom. The altar rails. Now they were the gift of William Unwin, who was rector between 1769 and 1787. They therefore are older than the chancel. Where they were to begin with, again, we don't know. I presume they were here somewhere. But we don't actually know where they were, but he certainly gave them, it is recorded, and he wrote about giving the altar rails to the church, but he didn't give the gates in the middle. If you look really closely, you can see that they are just fractionally different. They're very much softer wood. I don't really know my woods terribly well, but if you feel them, you can feel that they're a bit sort of softer than the railings either side of them. Now, Unwin had a friend called William Cooper, who wrote several hymns. In fact, William Cooper nearly became his stepfather, but he didn't. He just lived with his mother for some time. He was 7 years younger, so I suppose it looked respectable enough. But there was talk that they might have got married, but they didn't. And certainly the two Williams, Cooper and Unwin, stayed very good friends all their life. Whether he actually visited Stock, Cooper, we don't know. He certainly knew of it. There are two poems in existence, Tithing Time in Stock, or The Annual Distress, as it is also known, which is a very lengthy poem about tithing time in Stock, and also verses addressed to a country clergyman, to the Reverend W. Cawthorne Unwin, rector of Stock. So I think it's fairly safe to say Cooper knew about Stock, even if he never visited. Somebody that did visit William Unwin was Wilberforce, the anti-slavery man. He has recorded in his diaries that he was here on one Easter day. He doesn't actually mention coming to church. He mentions going for a walk around and that sort of thing. But he actually did come here, Wilberforce. William Unwin died at 41. He happened to be in Winchester at the time. And he's buried in Winchester Cathedral, which is rather nice for him. There are two other rectors that are commemorated in the chancel. There's Gibson, who immediately preceded Austin, who immediately preceded Tatham. So he's could be almost within living memory. Not quite. He left in 1913. Now, I suppose anybody... Well, I quoted one. Betty Gibbon would have been here then. She was born here, though she might not remember him. He was here between 1877 and 1914. His son was killed in the Great War and is remembered on the War Memorial in the middle of the village. And also mentioned is his wife on that plaque. He wrote the Annals of Stock in the year 1914, when the year he resigned. If you can get hold of it, if you haven't got it, do. I'm not quite sure where you can get hold of it. I have got a copy. I've only got one. I haven't got it with me because I don't trust anybody at all. And it's absolutely thick with photographs of the church as it was back in 1914 and earlier, some of which are on display at the back. So it's really quite an interesting book. Then we have Zephaniah Pierce, a wonderful name. 1678 to 1703 he was rector, and his wife is also commemorated on that plaque. I know nothing about Zephaniah Pierce except he's got a lovely name, and his mother is buried in my chancel, he recorded. That possessiveness is not quite as odd as it seems, because there was a time, are you listening, Father Stephen, when it was the incumbent's duty to keep the chancel in good repair. So in order to call it my chancel really wasn't quite as nonsensical as it might appear, or possessive even. So that's Zephaniah Pierce. Then if we move further up and look at the sanctuary, I've mentioned Christopher Tatham. He has a window on the south wall in the sedilia that was made by David Wasley, and it's a wonderful piece of work. Do have a look at it. It's got wonderful sort of blue, medieval blue in the glass, and a hand holding a torch with a chalice growing out of it. And it's actually, we still have the chalice, was Father Tatham's chalice that they used in this window. So it really does, you know, if you knew Father Tatham and knew his, it means quite a bit, that. The choir pews, they survive as they were from the mid-1970s restoration, when Father Jeremy Bunting was here, who many people remember. It was under the general direction of Lawrence King, that I spoke about very much time ago. Lawrence King built or designed the Ascension in Chelmsford and St George's in Brentford, amongst other works. And John Hayward was actually the designer of those pews, this pulpit, that kneeler, and with its stand, and that was when the pews disappeared, that had been put in 1948 or 50. They were all taken away and these chairs put in their place. That was all in the 1970s, mid-70s. He also designed the Christus Rex on the north altar and the candlesticks on the north altar, John Hayward. And I have at home actually some of the original drawings of it. The list of rectors. The first rector, as I've already said, Father Gregory, 1232. That's quite a long time, 800 years of rectors of Stock. 230 of those years, Stock and Ramsden Bell House were joint parishes. Now, I know we have joint parishes now, but now the Church of England only gives a man one income, even if he's got 4 parishes. Back between 1734, in those days, if you had 2 parishes, you had 2 incomes, thank you very much. And quite often, you could actually just stick some curate out in one, pay half of one of your incomes, so you have 1.5 incomes for doing one church, which wasn't a bad way of going about things. Perhaps not terribly good for the congregation, but very good for the priest. If we look from behind this wall, the North Chapel, where we now keep our sacrament, was built originally as an organ chapel or chamber, 1904. The Bevington organ was built in there. It's up there now. It's the same, basically the same organ. So it was, I think, pretty good. And it was moved up there in 1948. The window, which depicts the Epiphany, is our second horse. And here they are again, the Ellis Haggard family. That one is given in memory of the Haggard girls' parents. The arched doorway here. This was discovered, or rediscovered, as they were building the organ chamber. And was opened up and could have been an entrance to a rood loft. There's an interesting sort of bulge in the wall just behind this pillar that could be the remains of a flight of stairs, we think. Whether it really is, we don't know, because we never hacked into it. I don't think we will. And as I say, colours appeared around that door in the 1970 restoration. The North Aisle, 15th century, a very fine king post roof, very badly sealed, frankly. It's been rather killed by the ceiling. It should be much more open so you can see more woodwork, and a king post roof, the ceiling should have been away from the beams. So when that was done, we don't know. But it's still a very fine roof. And 3 more Ellises. Mrs. in the middle, as I say, died in 1937. She's flanked by her 2 sons. Richard Hugh Adam, he died in India, aged 22. And then Ray Adam was killed in France weeks only before the 1918 armistice. Harry Enfield's father-in-law, who was descended from them, is also a Ray, R-A-E, they spell it in that family. So they still keep that name going. If we move to the back of the North Aisle, and I like calling this the Rood Chapel, because housed in it are the figures that were originally up here. Originally they were here after the 1940s, 40-50 restoration, a big beam across, with these figures standing on it. Our Lord hanging on a cross that was on it, and Our Lady and St John standing either side. It was then altered with the 1970s to take away the huge beam and open it up a bit more and have it just sort of a hanging cross with the two figures. Then Richard Buckingham, who was the incumbent in the 1980s, decided that he'd like it all opened up, so as you walk into the church, you really can see the east window clearly, and you can. There is sometimes a discussion about whether they're in the best position. Some people think they should be here, where they'd be sort of more visible. But anyway, that's where they were put. They're lime wood and were designed in 1955 by Gwyneth Holt. Now, Gwyneth Holt did a lot of work around the diocese, some in the cathedral. I've already mentioned the organ that was originally here. It was moved there in 48. It was improved and enlarged, a second manual put in. There was a gallery up there in 1869, and that apparently housed some sort of barrel organ, and it was removed in 1888. A wonderful place, a choir gallery. Then you don't have the choir cluttering up the view to the altar, you see. But they don't have it in many churches now. The belfry, 15th century. It's not one of the most complex of Essex steeples. Blackmore possibly holds that. That's a very sort of, 3 or 4 stages. Nonetheless, it is a very fine example. Alec Clifton Taylor raved about it in some book that I can't find. It's freestanding. In theory, you could sort of lift the whole thing up and move it 20 yards towards Billericay, it would still stay standing up. In practice, it might be a bit difficult to do that, I agree. But it doesn't lean on the church, in other words. Though I think it probably relies on the church somewhat. But it is freestanding. There are 3 bells. The oldest one is 1577, then one of 1799, and one of 1847. We can't ring up the bells. There isn't the strength up there since the 1940 bomb damage to ring up, but we can chime them and do from time to time. If you go into the belfry, look up, stand right in the middle and look up and observe our green man. Now, a green man, they date from Roman times, these male Medusa masks, sometimes called. Not quite sure what they are, really. They could be a series of things. They could be fertility symbols. Sometimes people say that they're showing nature, reclaiming everything. Man's face surrounded by nature, being reclaimed by nature. Or they're known as a foliate head. Fertility symbols, bit doubtful that one, I think. But there it is. It's good. It's worth seeing. As I say, possibly the best thing the easiest explanation of them is to remind us that all man is but grass. Do notice the kneelers. They were part of the 1980 restoration. A lot of people put a lot of work into them, and as we say at various things, please put them back as you leave. then we won't have to. But we're not leaving yet, I'm afraid. Outside, the stone cross that I've already mentioned is exactly where the landmine bomb or whatever it was fell. And that's now our garden of remembrance. And the cross is in memory of King George VI. And it's said to be unique in this dedication. It's the only one. Then if you look back at the west door, and above it there's some very fine tracery, dating from the 15th century. And it really is worth a look at that. Then if you go a bit further round, just above that window, the north window, there's another grotesque head which dates from about 1350. Again, quite what it does, I don't know. Probably scares devils, but it may not. A dragon weather vane, 1760. The year that George III came to the throne. And to our right are the vestries, and they were described by Dr. James Beckley, who was a relative of my mummy's. He described them in his re-editing of Pevsner's County History as exemplary. And they are pretty good. They're really Father Jeremy Bunting's memorial. He did all the money raising, or got other people to do the money raising for them. And he was the mover behind it. And they were opened in 1986. And as I often say when I'm standing in this pulpit, here endeth the lesson. Does anybody want to challenge it? Sorry, does anybody want to ask it?
Yes. Adrian, am I correct in thinking that Gibson, when he retired in 1914, actually stayed on in stock and helped out during the First World War? I've heard this, and I believe actually, am I correct in thinking?
I don't know.
But I'd heard this somewhere, I'd read this.
I have heard this, yes. And in fact, he stayed on for a little help. But I don't know if he was here for very long.
Didn't he also write another book? I'm not quite sure. Did he write one that was...
Oh, yes, I did make a note of that. He also, Gibson, also did a transcription of all the very old registers and things for the church. And indeed, I think he did up to about the 18th century with those. And there are some names in there of people whose families are still around. I think there's a Keeling or two in there. Okay, I don't think there are any Keelings left. There are Keeling descendants, but I think there are Keelings mentioned in there, and one or two others as well.
But he also started a book on Ramsden Bell House, is that
Oh, well, no, Ramsden Bell House. I don't know that he wrote a book on Ramsden Bell House. But of course, Austin wrote a book about rector of two parishes, which was including Ramsden Bell House. Although he virtually concentrates on stock, the occasion mentions Ramsden Bell House in his book. Anything else?
Well, the painted ceiling, I'm glad with that going up, but I think it's a wonderful asset to the church, and other people agree. But was it researched that the church had a painted ceiling at some stage, or did someone just have the idea?
That ceiling, as far as I'm aware, was a creation of Christopher Tayford's. It was certainly here in his day, as other people will remember won't they? That ceiling has been like that as long as you remember, and Ben's been around longer than I have in the church. And it was all repainted as part of the 1980 restoration. but it was repainted and not painted, if you see what I mean.
I see.
Yeah. And roses, of course, are a symbol of Our Lady, which is somewhat Catholic, but never mind. Yes.
Yes, the Bowsman, is it still handed down from rector to rector?
Oh no. Let's think. The Varson at the moment is held by the Guild of All Souls. Before that it was Miss Leslie Harvard, who was introduced into stock by Christopher Tatham. Christopher Tatham came here, as I said, just after the war, bringing with him, and there's a picture of them at the back, a small group of ladies, all of whom had been bombed out of their homes in West London, May evening. Mrs. Austin had the living when Tatham took it. Then Tatham took it. And at the moment it's the Guild of All Souls. Although technically I think at the moment, am I not right, Father Stephen, we haven't got a patron technically because the bishop said we couldn't have.
Technically, yeah.
Technically, yes, I thought like that. But there is a list of, included on the list of rectors that I didn't really mention, is the name of the patron of the living as well. So it's changed quite a lot over the years. And don't come running to me to say it's incomplete. It isn't, unfortunately. That is a complete list of known rectors of stock, because we don't have one now. We have a priest in charge. I'm just splitting hairs. Yes, I know it's like time that Father Stephen's on it. Anybody? Yes.
That evening when the landmine was dropped, that's a lone mine. And he might have been aiming for the army camp down on the Englishtown Road.
It could have been.
Yes.
Yes, we don't really know why they dropped it there, although they were on their way home, I believe. They sort of dropped things willy-nilly, so they didn't have them when they wanted to.
There was an army camp down there.
There was an army camp down where, what do they call it? I call it Anthrax Grange. Oh, Harvard Grange. There was an army camp down there, wasn't there?
Yeah, further. Further out.
Adrian, I think we've all thoroughly enjoyed your talk tonight, hearing about the different bits of the church and the history and all the rest of it, and you've obviously covered practically all of it because there haven't been that many questions afterwards, and some are comments rather than questions. You obviously have answered what everybody wanted to know. So once again, thank you very much, and can we show our thanks in the normal way?
Now I understand that usherettes are going to visit all parts of the theatre with refreshments.